Dive into history for a good night's rest. But before you do, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. You might not have the strength later. Now close your eyes, the story begins. It's widely accepted that the greatest cataclysm in Earth's history was the disaster that wiped out the majestic dinosaurs. This narrative is firmly etched into our collective consciousness, a colossal celestial body slamming into our planet, the ensuing firestorm, an endless winter, and the inevitable demise of an era dominated by gigantic creatures. Yet, what's far less known, and strikingly paradoxical, is that an event of vastly greater magnitude, an almost complete reset of all life on Earth, occurred long before these reptilian titans ever appeared. A staggering 252 million years before our current era, long before even the first dinosaur set foot on Earth, our planet had already endured its own apocalypse. During that ancient period, the world wasn't populated by colossal reptiles, but by entirely different, truly fantastical life forms. Vast continental landmasses were roamed by mammal-like reptiles, mighty creatures that were an astonishing fusion of rhinoceros and reptilian traits. While the skies were traversed by gigantic dragonflies whose wingspans rivaled those of a modern eagle. This was an incredibly complex and long-established biosphere, astonishingly rich and diverse. And it was precisely this biosphere that was almost entirely wiped off the face of the planet. This monumental cataclysm, known as the Great Permian Extinction, was triggered by a series of unimaginably powerful and prolonged volcanic eruptions that engulfed vast swathes of modern-day Siberia. The consequences were devastating. More than 90% of all species inhabiting the marine depths and approximately 70% of terrestrial vertebrates were irrevocably lost. The planet's atmosphere became poisoned by toxic gases spewing from its depths, while once thriving oceans transformed into dead, lifeless zones, saturated with acid and nearly devoid of oxygen. This event was a true global reset, a virtually complete sterilization of biological diversity. And here lies the greatest irony. It was precisely this unimaginable catastrophe, this most colossal tragedy, that cleared the slate and forged the utterly unique conditions that later allowed dinosaurs to emerge and flourish. They didn't ascend to the top of the food chain in a world overflowing with life and prosperity. On the contrary, their rise occurred amidst the smoldering ruins of a preceding, nearly forgotten era. They weren't the planet's original rulers, but rather those who managed to build their colossal empire directly upon the ashes. Therefore, our narrative will extend far beyond a mere catalogue of ancient species and their dimensions, and it won't resemble a typical Walking with Dinosaurs documentary. What will unfold before us is a truly epic drama, recounting survival at the precipice of oblivion and the seizure of global dominion. This is a story of how life itself, pushed to the critical brink of near total extinction, not only found the strength to rebound, but also gave rise to some of the most magnificent and awe-inspiring creatures that ever inhabited our planet. We will witness how, from the shadows of oblivion, emerged humble, nimble, and at first glance, utterly unremarkable creatures who, thanks to a unique complex of evolutionary innovations, ranging from an innovative pelvic bone structure ensuring efficient locomotion to a highly efficient respiratory system, managed to conquer the entire world and hold that power for an incredible 150 million years. This isn't merely a tale of prehistoric animals, it's a gripping evolutionary thriller, a grand geopolitical saga on a planetary scale, where continents ceaselessly shift, climates undergo radical transformations, and nothing less than dominion over all life on Earth hangs in the balance. What's most striking about this story isn't so much the fact of their eventual triumph, but rather the sheer audacity and ingenuity of evolution's grand design itself. Just imagine a world that had passed through the crucible of sterilization by fire and poison, transformed into an almost blank canvas with a poisoned atmosphere and a catastrophically unstable climate. And upon this scorched, desolate canvas, Only a few scattered groups of surviving creatures begin their desperate race for a place in the sun. Among them are agile, energetic, small creatures that would later become the ancestors of dinosaurs. At first glance, they don't look like the future crowned rulers of the planet at all. They resemble more like scrappy opportunists, survivors scurrying among the debris and ruins of a fallen great civilization. But it was in their finely tuned anatomy, in their unique metabolism, that the key factor was laid, the one that would unlock their path to the future. To see in these unassuming creatures, no bigger than a common dog, the blueprint for a colossal Tyrannosaurus or a majestic Brachiosaurus is akin to imagining a modern super-powerful supercomputer by looking at the very first, barely sparking transistor. This is a story of how absolute underdogs, who would never have been given the slightest chance in the old world, managed to become the sole and undisputed rulers of the new. Thus, our journey will not be mere contemplation, but a full-fledged, deep intellectual investigation, a paleontological detective story of sorts, where we will seek answers to fundamental questions. Our goal isn't just to marvel at magnificent reconstructions of ancient life forms, but to metaphorically look under the hood of these truly astonishing creatures, to grasp the inner logic of their incredible success. We will meticulously dissect their anatomy as if it were a complex engineering design, and their physiology as unique software that allowed them not just to survive, but to incredibly thrive where others utterly failed. Together, we will follow the tracks carefully preserved in stone, striving to answer not the trivial question, what was it? But the far deeper and more significant questions, why and how? For the true mystery lies not in the fact of their subsequent grandeur, but in how, from the ashes of the greatest biological catastrophe ever to shake our planet, the most successful and incredibly long-lived dynasty in Earth's history was able to be born. This story compels us to reflect not only on the power of evolution, but also on the incredible, almost mystical ability of life to resurrect from the dust, each time discovering new, unimaginable paths to dominance. If we had the unique opportunity to transport ourselves 252 million years back in time, directly to the very dawn of the Triassic period, the first thing that would strike our imagination would be the unimaginable alienness of this ancient reality. You could forget any familiar landscapes or sensations. The first and most intense sensation that would overwhelm you would be suffocation. The air in those times was thin and catastrophically low in oxygen. Every breath would demand immense effort, and your heart would begin to pound desperately, trying to oxygenate blood with what was barely present in the atmosphere. The atmosphere wouldn't emanate the sense of life. On the contrary, it would be saturated with the concentrated odor of planetary death. It was a thick, heavy, suffocating cocktail, mixing a sharp, nose-stinging aroma like broken glass of sulfuric compounds, remnants of the recent volcanic hell, with a metallic, sterile tang of ozone, continuously generated by countless dry thunderstorms raging over the superheated, incinerated land. Beneath your feet, you wouldn't find familiar soil, but fine, dry, blood-red dust, like rust, that would rise with the slightest whisper of wind. It smelled of hot stone and immutable eternity. Visually, this world was utterly barren and monotonous. The horizon blurred into a shimmering, superheated haze, while a pale, hostile sun bathed the entire environment in a harsh, merciless light that allowed for no subtleties. The soundscape was a symphony of deafening silence, a silence so pervasive that it felt almost physically oppressive, emanating from this boundless, desolate expanse. This silence was almost never broken by the joyful singing of birds or the persistent buzzing of insects. The only sounds were the continuous, mournful whistle of the wind, circulating unimpeded across the vast plains of the gigantic, unified supercontinent Pangaea, and the rare, dry, rolling crackle of lightning, echoing from somewhere beyond the distant horizon. A faint whisper of life was evident only in the hurried, nervous scratching of tiny claws on stone, as some small, lizard-like creature scurried from one boulder's shadow to another, seeking refuge from the scorching sun. This was a world that had survived its own apocalypse, a world that was painfully yet persistently relearning how to breathe. To survive in this harsh and unpredictable reality, strict adherence to three unspoken but fundamental laws was required, a kind of evolutionary code deeply embedded within the very DNA of this new, emerging era. The first, and undoubtedly chief of these codes, was ruthless efficiency. In conditions of severe oxygen scarcity and extremely meager food resources, energy became the most important, if not the sole, true currency of survival. Every movement, every breath, every heartbeat had to be maximally economical and calculated. Any creature that inefficiently expended precious calories was doomed to swift and inevitable extinction. Evolution, in response to this challenge, bet on a fundamentally new body architecture. The limbs of creatures began to transform, shifting from an awkward position at the sides of the torso to directly underneath it, evolving from mere props into highly efficient supporting columns. This change wasn't just a modification of gait. It was a true biological revolution that radically reduced the energy expenditure of locomotion and opened an unprecedented path to endurance and long-term existence. The second code of survival was versatility, or to put it plainly, pure opportunism. In an unstable, constantly changing and unpredictable world, narrow specialization became a direct death sentence. Those species that depended on a single type of plant for food or hunted exclusively one type of prey were destined to die out along with their sources of sustenance. The winners in this ruthless race were a kind of biological weeds, creatures capable of feeding on virtually anything they encountered and adapting to life in almost any condition. The clearest and most illustrative example of such a strategy is the Lystrosaurus. This was an outwardly clumsy, barrel-chested herbivore with a horny beak instead of complex teeth. It wasn't distinguished by exceptional strength or speed, but its incredible resilience and absolute lack of pickiness in food allowed it to become the most numerous vertebrate on the planet, a true embodiment and symbol of survival in extreme conditions. And finally, the third code was speed and reaction. The era of slow, ponderous, heavily armored giants had irrevocably passed with their world. Now, the decisive advantage lay with those that were smaller, significantly faster, and possessed a more advanced nervous system, allowing them to detect mortal danger in time or, conversely, to launch a lightning-fast attack on prey. The world had transformed into a vast arena for biological sprinters and guerrillas, not for heavy and unwieldy tanks. To fully grasp the true scale of this monumental biological overhaul, let's try to find a precise and convincing analogy in our modern world. Imagine that the entire global economy, which until this moment consisted of colossal, sluggish, old-school state corporations, suddenly and catastrophically collapsed. A total, comprehensive meltdown occurred, completely erasing all existing markets and destroying every single supply chain without exception. The surviving Lystrosaurus and other mammal-like reptiles are like the few remaining factories that, using primitive but reliable equipment, begin mass-producing a single, extremely simple but vital product. Let's say it's canned stew. These enterprises aren't characterized by innovation. Their business model is built solely on quantity, not quality. They successfully fill the vacuum that has formed, but they possess absolutely no potential for further growth and development. Now, the ancestors of dinosaurs, those early archosaurs, they are, without exaggeration, the boldest and most ambitious venture startup in history, born literally in a garage amidst the ruins of the old, fallen world. At this stage, they don't yet have mass production or a significant market share. But the fundamental difference lies in the fact that they aren't even attempting to copy old, obsolete technologies. They, in turn, embarked on developing a truly revolutionary platform, creating an entirely new operating system for living organisms. Their unique vertical limb posture isn't just a minor improvement on previous models, it's a fundamentally new chassis architecture ensuring unprecedented locomotion efficiency. And their developing respiratory system, which includes air sacs and operates on the principle of a through unidirectional airflow, can be likened to the creation of a super-powerful processing unit that functions perfectly even under conditions of acute fuel scarcity, that is, oxygen. While this biological startup is in its initial phase, in the prototype stage, actively testing its first models, its technological superiority is fundamental and undeniable. It's betting not just on survival in the current challenging conditions, but on total and unconditional domination in the near future. And it is in this harsh, post-apocalyptic economy of the Triassic period, where resources are incredibly scarce, that their innovative technologies will ultimately completely change all the rules of the game and establish a new order. For millions of years after the most devastating extinction event in Earth's history, the world teetered on the brink, trapped in an incredibly fragile balance. Across the scorched, desolate plains of the lone supercontinent Pangaea, diverse groups of surviving species waged a desperate battle for supremacy. On one side of this evolutionary arena stood the cynodonts, descendants of mammal-like reptiles, stocky, fur-covered creatures whose forms already hinted at the emerging hallmarks of future mammals. They were renowned for their incredible stamina and remarkable adaptability to shifting conditions. On the opposing flank were the formidable pseudosuchians, close kin of modern-day crocodiles and the undisputed overlords of Triassic ecosystems. Some, like the monstrous Postosuchus, were 4-meter armored apex predators that reigned at the pinnacle of the food chain. They were astonishingly powerful, immensely massive, and appeared utterly invincible within this established hierarchy. The entire ecosystem resembled a battlefield locked in a dire, inescapable stalemate. While the current players were undeniably effective in their own right, their evolutionary solutions and adaptations were relics of an older world, born from the past. Their metabolisms were relatively sluggish, and their locomotion was energy-intensive, severely limiting their potential. They were well adapted for mere survival in challenging conditions, but utterly unprepared for large-scale expansion and the conquest of new ecological niches. The world patiently awaited a revolutionary transformation. What was needed was a potent catalyst, a novel concept, an entirely new type of organism capable of shattering this entrenched code and offering a fundamentally different solution to the dilemmas of survival and dominance. And this mighty engine of history did indeed emerge. It didn't burst forth as an immediately recognizable titan, but rather as an ingenious concept, an incredibly sophisticated engineering blueprint embodied within the unassuming forms of initially small and quite unremarkable creatures. These, indeed, were the very first dinosaurs. Their debut in the paleontological record wasn't merely another incremental step in the ceaseless march of evolution. It was a bona fide biological, technological breakthrough. Their secret lay in a unique, interconnected package of 3 fundamental innovations, a revolutionary ensemble rightly dubbed the Great Dinosaur Triad. The first innovation was their fully erect or parasagittal limb posture. The limbs of these creatures, unlike the splayed stance of primitive reptiles, were positioned directly beneath the body, much like sturdy columns steadfastly supporting a monumental edifice. This was by no means a mere cosmetic, superficial alteration. It allowed the animal's entire body weight to be borne directly by the skeletal structure, significantly offloading the musculature, which radically boosted the efficiency of both walking and running. What's more, this modification liberated the forelimbs for a host of other specialized tasks, tasks like grasping, seizing prey, or dexterously manipulating objects. Dinosaurs, in essence, became the planet's first true bipedal, meaning two-legged runners, capable of blistering high-speed locomotion. The second crucial innovation was a significantly lightened skeleton. The bones of many early dinosaurs were not solid and ponderous, but rather hollow or permeated by an intricate network of air sacs, much like the bones of modern birds. This represented a true triumph of natural engineering. The skeleton became substantially lighter, yet retained essential strength, thereby reducing the inertia of the moving body and enabling greater velocity and sharper maneuvers. And finally, the third, and arguably the most pivotal component of this revolutionary package, was their entirely novel, groundbreaking respiratory system. Instead of primitive lungs that operated on a simple in-and-out principle, they developed a sophisticated system featuring multiple air sacs, ensuring a unidirectional, continuous flow of air through the lungs. This was akin to fitting a powerful turbocharger onto an internal combustion engine. In the oxygen-poor atmosphere of the Triassic period, such a highly efficient system bestowed upon them an immense competitive advantage, allowing them to sustain an incredibly high level of activity and endurance where their less adapted rivals would quickly run out of steam and falter. The emergence of creatures endowed with such a unique and powerful suite of characteristics had the effect of an exploding bomb, but one with a delayed fuse. Their contemporaries, the mighty, massive pseudo-Suchians and the stealthy, nimble Cynodonts, likely didn't even initially grasp the threat looming over them. The first dinosaurs, such as the elegant Eoraptor or the fearsome Herrerasaurus, whose fossil remains were unearthed in modern-day Argentina, were relatively small creatures. Measuring only between 3 and 10 feet long, they couldn't openly challenge adult Postosuchus in a direct confrontation. But that wasn't their strategy. They operated like biological gorillas, fast, agile, incredibly resilient. They carved out a niche as swift predators, specializing in hunting the young of large reptiles, the nimble Cynodonts, and any other creatures smaller than themselves. Where the ponderous pseudo-Suchian might be likened to a clunky, heavily armored tank, the dinosaur represented the equivalent of a highly mobile special forces unit, swift, strikingly efficient, and devastatingly lethal. They possessed the unique ability to pursue their prey for many hours without succumbing to fatigue, a feat made possible by their phenomenal physiology. The rest of the world's reaction to their arrival wasn't immediate terror, but a gradual yet inexorable displacement. Old, familiar life forms began to relentlessly lose out in the competitive struggle. In the harshest, most arid and inhospitable regions of vast Pangaea, far from life-giving rivers and lakes, where older reptiles with their slower metabolisms faced insurmountable difficulties, dinosaurs, by contrast, thrived absolutely, flourishing in these extreme conditions. No one in the Triassic world likely even imagined that these upstarts wouldn't just be another of nature's evolutionary experiments, but would become the harbingers of an entirely new, unprecedented era. This wasn't merely a shift in dominant species on the planet. It marked a paradigm shift in the very nature of terrestrial life, opening a fresh chapter in Earth's history. So, how exactly did this new, highly efficient operating system function in practice, granting dinosaurs such a striking advantage? To grasp this, we need to alter our approach. Stop viewing the early dinosaur as just another ordinary animal. Instead, let's look at it through an engineer's eyes, analyzing it as a revolutionary combat machine designed and assembled for total dominance in the most extreme and adverse conditions. The central metaphor, which serves as the key to understanding their phenomenal success, is that a dinosaur isn't merely an organism composed of separate parts. It is a perfectly integrated, highly optimized system, a true biological supercar forged in the crucible of the Triassic period. And, like any outstanding supercar, its superiority isn't due to a single component, but to the ingenious, synergistic combination of 3 key assemblies: its powerful engine, its high-performance chassis, and its lightweight yet robust frame. It is precisely now that we will peer under the hood of this astonishing biological machine to meticulously dissect its mechanics and modus operandi. At the core of dinosaurs' incredible vitality lay their phenomenal engine, a highly efficient respiratory system. In the early Mesozoic era, when atmospheric oxygen levels were approximately one-third lower than today, the ability to endure became paramount for survival. Most dominant reptiles of the time possessed primitive breathing apparatuses. Their lungs functioned like bellows, where each inhale mixed fresh air with already used air, significantly diminishing the efficiency of gas exchange. Dinosaurs, however, evolved to create a system that can, without exaggeration, be called the biological equivalent of a turbocharger. Air circulated through their bodies in a unique pattern. It didn't just enter and exit, but rather continuously, in one direction, was pumped through a complex network of air sacs that encompassed their entire bodies and even permeated their bone cavities. This mechanism ensured that their lungs were constantly bathed exclusively in fresh, oxygen-rich air, eliminating dead zones and the mixing of gas flows. Consequently, the muscles of these astonishing creatures received an uninterrupted supply of energy, allowing them to sustain high levels of activity for hours, whereas their less adapted contemporaries quickly lost strength even after brief exertion. Any chase for a dinosaur transformed into an exhausting marathon whose outcome was predetermined. The next fundamental element of their superiority was the chassis, represented by their pelvic region and limbs. Here, too, a true triumph of evolutionary engineering genius is revealed. It is widely known that dinosaurs' legs were positioned vertically beneath their torsos, but the true innovation lay in the mechanism that facilitated this. The key to this puzzle was hidden in the unique structure of their hip joint. The acetabulum, a distinct socket into which the head of the femur fit in dinosaurs, was characterized by its perforate, completely open lower section, rather than being solid like in most other reptiles. This exclusive anatomical feature, peculiar only to dinosaurs, served as a natural lock that physically forced the femur into a strictly vertical position. Thus, the limbs could no longer splay uncontrollably, ensuring stability. This seemingly simple, yet truly ingenious design solution radically transformed the entire biomechanics of their locomotion. From then on, body mass was transmitted not to constantly strained muscles, but directly to the skeleton, much like how load is distributed in strong architectural columns. This principle allowed for the liberation of a colossal amount of muscular energy that was previously wasted merely on maintaining balance. As a result, walking and running became exceptionally energy efficient. Furthermore, because their forelimbs lost their primary function of support, they gained the ability for specialization, grasping, holding prey, and complex manipulations. In essence, dinosaurs acquired something akin to hands a full 100 million years before the first primates appeared on Earth. Completing this complex of advantages was their frame, a uniquely structured skeleton. Any engineer working on creating highly efficient race cars or modern aerospace vehicles would undoubtedly appreciate this solution found in nature. Instead of forming solid and massive bone structures, the evolutionary process pursued radical optimization. Dinosaur bones, especially in carnivorous theropods, were not merely hollow, but permeated by an intricate system of interconnected cavities and thin partitions, a phenomenon known as pneumatization. This can be compared to the high-strength truss structures used in modern bridges, or to the light, yet extremely rigid honeycomb structures applied in aircraft wings. The outcome of such a structure was a substantial reduction in overall body mass, while simultaneously preserving and even enhancing resistance to bending and compressive loads. A lightened skeleton meant a significant reduction in inertia. This allowed dinosaurs to demonstrate lightning-fast acceleration, abrupt braking, and perform significantly more complex and agile maneuvers than their massive, less mobile contemporaries. Now that we've examined each component individually, let's integrate these factors and envision how this complex of unique adaptations manifested in the real-world struggle for survival. Let us paint a vivid picture of a hunt unfolding through the eyes of an early dinosaur. Our first stage, detecting potential prey and initiating the pursuit. It's a scorching afternoon across the sun-baked expanses of the ancient supercontinent Pangaea. Most reptiles at this time of day prefer to conserve energy, seeking refuge in the life-saving shade. Our protagonist, a Herrerasaurus, however, is not among them. Its high metabolism, continuously fueled by an extraordinarily efficient respiratory system, allows it to remain active and energetic. Suddenly, it zeroes in on its quarry, a slow and rather clumsy cynodont. The chase is inexorably on. Next, the chassis springs into action. The cynodont makes a desperate, frantic dash. Its semi-bent, splayed limbs churn at their absolute limit, its body swaying inefficiently from side to side, irrevocably squandering precious energy reserves. The Herrerasaurus, however, moves entirely differently. It doesn't just run, it seems to glide effortlessly across the ground, taking long, springy strides. Its perfectly positioned vertical legs function as flawless levers, ensuring movement with virtually no energy loss. It doesn't need to exert superhuman effort to catch its victim. It simply maintains a comfortable pace, knowing full well that the prey's fate is sealed. After just 1 minute, the full might of the engine reveals itself. The cynodont is already beginning to gasp noticeably. Its primitive, inefficient lungs are completely overwhelmed by the escalating demand in the thin Triassic air. Muscles, deprived of sufficient oxygen, weaken, and the victim's movements become increasingly sluggish and clumsy. At the same time, the Herrerasaurus's breathing remains perfectly steady. Its turbocharged lungs continuously supply oxygen to its blood. For it, the very concept of fatigue in such a situation simply doesn't exist. This combination of evolutionary innovations didn't just give them an advantage, it transformed them into living embodiments of efficiency, laying the groundwork for an era that seemed boundless. But could these perfect mechanisms ever be surpassed? And what might possibly shake such absolute dominance? Phase 4, the nimble maneuver and the crushing final blow. Seizing the precise moment its prey had utterly exhausted its strength, the Herrerasaurus fully exploited the incredible lightness of its skeleton. It executed a lightning-fast dash to the side, instantly outmaneuvering the cynodont and completely cutting off its escape routes. The weakened cynodont stumbled, losing its balance. In that critical instant, the predator's newly freed forelimbs showcased their lethal new function. A powerful strike from a clawed paw descended upon the victim, and the prey dropped dead. The entire system had once again demonstrated its absolute, undeniable superiority. This was no mere ordinary hunt. It was a vivid demonstration of a revolutionary new technology, one destined to forever reshape the ancient world in the very near future. We humans often marvel at the colossal size of sauropods, creatures like the graceful Diplodocus or the majestic Brachiosaurus, and in our minds we paint them as solemn, unhurried giants serenely gazing upon ancient landscapes. However, such an image, romantic as it may be, is far removed from the harsh truth of their existence. The life of such a behemoth was no tranquil existence. Rather, it was a ceaseless, 24-hour-a-day production process, governed by a singular, all-consuming objective: the relentless search for and processing of enormous volumes of fuel. Daily, from the first rays of dawn until deep into the night, this living, four-legged biological factory had to ingest and process hundreds of kilograms, and by some estimates, up to an entire ton of plant matter. To grasp the true scale of this phenomenon, just imagine, it would be akin to a human eating an entire haystack every single day, weighing as much as a compact car. The sauropod's impossibly long neck didn't function as a graceful instrument for surveying its surroundings, but rather as a powerful crane arm or an industrial combine harvester, systematically clearing 1 hectare of vegetation after another. Its jaws, armed with simple peg-like teeth, didn't perform chewing motions. Instead, they acted like colossal rakes or mowers, stripping tons of ferns, conifers, and cycad leaves, and funneling them deep into the esophagus. The life of this creature knew neither pause nor rest. It was an unending, monotonous, yet vitally important cycle. Strip, swallow, digest, excrete. Over its multi-year lifespan, just one sauropod consumed biomass equivalent to an entire modern forest. It was more than just an animal. It was a walking ecosystem, a geological force capable of reshaping landscapes, a powerful living engine that processed tons of organic matter, thereby sustaining the delicate balance of its world. But who then were the true, unseen architects of this grand enterprise? Who provided the logistics, the funding, and the technical support for this biological marvel? The answer might surprise you. It wasn't the dinosaurs themselves, but their microscopic, unseen allies. The sauropod itself, despite all its physiological might, was utterly incapable of independently digesting the tough, cellulose-rich vegetation it ingested in unimaginable quantities. Like you and me, it simply lacked the necessary enzymes to break down these compounds. It would be like trying to survive by eating only wood or paper. The real work was performed by an invisible army, consisting of trillions upon trillions of microscopic organisms residing within its vast digestive system. Its gut was a colossal fermentation vat, comparable in size to a small car, where billions of bacteria, archaea, and protozoa toiled tirelessly, much like skilled laborers in a massive chemical plant. It was these very microorganisms that undertook the daunting task of breaking down the recalcitrant cellulose, unleashing volatile fatty acids, the very high-octane fuel that nourished the giant. Without this internal bioreactor, without this sophisticated symbiotic factory, even the most enormous sauropod on the planet would have inevitably starved, even amidst an abundance of food. These microbes were its unsung engineers, its biotechnologists, and its financiers. It was they who transformed mountains of seemingly useless greenery into pure, vital energy for the growth, movement, and constant temperature maintenance of that colossal body. The era of the gigantic dinosaurs became possible not only thanks to their long necks and powerful limbs, but also because of this ancient, invisible alliance between the macro and microcosms. The sauropod was merely a colossal vessel. The true team that navigated it through the turbulent waters of life was this microscopic civilization hidden within its depths. Now, let us shift our focus from the majestic herbivores to their predatory kin, and consider an astonishing mundane detail that completely reshapes our established understanding of their daily lives. If we examine the skull of an Allosaurus or a Tyrannosaurus, we see rows of enormous, sharp, dagger-like teeth, and instinctively envision a single, crushing, final bite. However, the most striking aspect here lies not so much in their force, but in the reliability and absolute unfailing nature of the entire system. These teeth were not static elements. They represented a kind of consumable, much like ammunition in a firearms magazine. Within the jaws of every predatory dinosaur, continuous tooth replacement processes occurred, organized on the principle of an assembly line or a revolver's cylinder. This constant dental regeneration, seemingly a minor detail, holds the key to understanding their remarkable resilience and efficiency. Beneath each actively functioning visible tooth, an entire queue of several replacements was already forming, fully prepared to take its place. Thus, if in the heat of a brutal skirmish with a Triceratops, or while crushing tough bones, a Tyrannosaurus broke or lost one of its teeth, it posed no serious problem or tragedy for it. This was an absolutely normal, evolutionarily anticipated situation. A completely new tooth, sharp and perfectly prepared for combat, would move into the place of the lost one within a matter of weeks, or perhaps months. Over its entire lifespan, a single large carnivorous theropod could replace several hundred or even thousands of teeth. Its maw was not just a collection of lethal weapons, but truly a self-replenishing arsenal. This seemingly insignificant detail opens up a new depth of understanding of their existence. It demonstrates that predators could afford to be incredibly brutal and, in a sense, careless in their attacks. They could sink their teeth into the hardest bones, tear through the thick hides of their victims, and yet not fear damaging their primary instrument, as it was, in essence, disposable and constantly renewable. Behind the terrifying majesty and ferocity of these predators lay flawless biological engineering, perfected to an absolute degree, where every tiny detail was considered for maximum efficiency and, even more importantly, for unfailing reliability. By the middle of the Cretaceous period, approximately 100 million years ago, the majestic empire of the dinosaurs reached its absolute zenith. This was a world completely shaped by them and for them. Their dominance seemed unbreakable, eternal, as if carved into the very geological record of the planet. On each of the ancient continents, from the lush, humid tropical forests of what would become South America to the vast coastal plains of North America, their own dynasties of giants reigned supreme. Colossal titanosaurs, direct descendants of the Jurassic sauropods, moved slowly and majestically across the landscape, resembling living, moving mountains. Enormous herds of duck-billed hadrosaurs and heavily armored ankylosaurs numbered in the thousands of individuals, while standing guard over their territories were true living fortresses on legs. Triceratops, with their formidable horns and powerful bony frills, capable of fending off any enemy. At the very apex of this complex and perfectly balanced ecological pyramid sat the supreme predators, such as the terrifying tyrannosaurs, whose existence was reliably guaranteed by this inexhaustible flow of living biomass. This entire grand system operated with the precision of a finely tuned clock. Each biological species occupied its unique niche, every adaptation perfected to absolute excellence. It seemed nothing in the entire Mesozoic era could shake this impeccable order. They were the pinnacle of evolutionary development, the ultimate product of 150 million years of continuous success and dominance. However, it was precisely at this moment of seeming invincibility that the system encountered a challenge, one that came not from the depths of space nor from within the Earth. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible revolution that began literally at their very feet. Flowering plants, or, as scientists call them, angiosperms, appeared and began their triumphant march across the planet. For the entire plant kingdom, this became a true perfect storm of evolutionary change. Unlike the slow-growing conservative ferns and gymnosperms, which for millions of years had formed the basis of most dinosaurs' diets, flowering plants were significantly more aggressive, characterized by incredibly rapid growth and stunning adaptability. They evolved faster, reproduced far more efficiently, and conquered new territories with astonishing, unprecedented speed. This was not merely the emergence of new flora species. It represented a radical shift in the entire operating system of the plant world. A world that for millions of years had been predominantly green and brown tones now literally began to bloom with new, vibrant colors, filling with entirely new, previously unseen scents. But for the colossal rulers of this world, for the dinosaurs, all this newfound beauty was merely an ominous harbinger of impending disaster. Their perfectly tuned food processing industry, which had been designed for the old, familiar raw materials, suddenly encountered completely new, unknown, and often toxic products. Thus began an irreversible shift in the planet's food chains, which called into question the very existence of those who had seemed immortal. Here, we observe a classic example of dialectics, where former strength transforms into fundamental weakness. The very grandeur and high degree of specialization that for long millions of years served as the primary advantage of herbivorous dinosaurs ultimately became their Achilles heel. Let us take hadrosaurs as an illustration. Their extraordinarily complex dental batteries, composed of hundreds of meticulously fitted teeth, represented an ideal tool for efficiently grinding tough horsetails and spiky conifer needles. Their colossal digestive systems were finely tuned to extract the maximum number of calories from this relatively low-nutrient food. However, when confronted with new flowering plants, this seemingly flawless system proved surprisingly inefficient. Many new plant species contained alkaloids and other toxic compounds for which dinosaurs lacked any natural defense or immunity. Furthermore, their rapid growth meant they contained significantly less fiber, and so the old, familiar methods of digestion simply stopped working. The gigantic, perfectly optimized biomass processing plants began to experience fatal malfunctions. Enormous herds, accustomed to endless, monotonous fern prairies, now found themselves surrounded by alien and often completely inedible vegetation. Their incredible size, their colossal physical power, which demanded daily consumption of tons of food, suddenly transformed into a metabolic trap. They became prisoners of their own greatness in a world whose fundamental rules of the game were rapidly and irreversibly changing. This crisis, born at the very base of the food web, inevitably dealt a crushing blow to its peak as well. The Tyrannosaurus was, without a doubt, a perfect killing machine, but it was a machine designed and honed to perfection for hunting very specific prey: gargantuan, multi-ton herbivores. Its strategy, its unique biomechanics, its truly monstrous bite force, all of this was optimized to effectively bring down sturdy Triceratops and mighty Edmontosaurus. But what was the king to do if his subjects, who formed the bedrock of his diet, began to die off en masse? The reduction in overall numbers and the increasing fragmentation of large herbivore herds meant that the most powerful predator on the planet found it increasingly difficult to find sustenance. Its gargantuan body demanded a colossal amount of calories to sustain itself. Hunting became not only increasingly risky, but also excessively energy-intensive. The very cohesion and stability of the ecosystem, which had allowed such colossal predators to thrive, began to steadily crumble. The king suddenly found himself ruling a rapidly emptying kingdom. Its incredible strength, its impressive size, its regal crown, all of this transformed from undeniable advantages into a heavy burden in a new, unpredictable, and catastrophically unstable world. Thus, dominance that had seemed eternal began to give way to chaos, and even the mightiest rulers of the Mesozoic found themselves powerless in the face of changes born within their own world. Long before a celestial body forever altered the face of our planet, the colossal dinosaur dynasty, whose undisputed dominion spanned tens of millions of years, was already in the throes of a deep systemic crisis. It was afflicted by an invisible, slowly progressing malady, a sort of ecological hardening of the arteries, which stripped them of their former flexibility. Their evolutionary strategy, predicated on gigantism and maintaining stable habitats, proved incapable of withstanding the rapid changes sweeping across the Earth. The familiar world, shaped and sustained by them for untold ages, literally began to slip away from beneath their feet. In its place, a new, far more dynamic and unpredictable epoch was emerging and gaining momentum, where flowering plants, diverse pollinating insects, and small, unusually nimble mammals, perfectly adapted to these transformations, thrived. The system, once seemingly unshakable, began to show its first, faint cracks, losing its internal stability. This then begs a crucial, deeply philosophical question. Had the asteroid never slammed into Earth, could the dinosaurs have adapted to this burgeoning new world? Could this finely tuned machine of total dominance have reconfigured itself on the fly, or was its fate already sealed, its countdown to complete demise having begun millions of years before the final, truly fiery curtain descended from the cosmos? In modern popular culture, the story of the dinosaur's demise is often simplified into a Hollywood blockbuster scenario. a gargantuan asteroid, an all-consuming fiery apocalypse, an instantaneous end. This version, no doubt, holds a kernel of truth, resting upon fundamental scientific discoveries such as the Chicxulub impact crater in Mexico and the discovery of a global iridium layer. It certainly forms a central piece of the grand puzzle. However, scientific integrity compels us to acknowledge that the true picture was, most likely, immeasurably more complex and far more tragic. To attribute all causes of such a monumental collapse to merely the impact of a cosmic body is akin to trying to explain the downfall of a great empire by a single lost battle. Many leading paleontologists today lean toward the theory that the cosmic impact was not the root cause, but rather the final, devastating crescendo in a long, unfolding drama that had been playing out on the planet for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of years. By that point, our planet was already gravely ill, its internal immune system compromised by another, equally formidable and inescapable foe, one that had been working slowly but inexorably from deep within Earth's depths. This silent yet destructive adversary was volcanism of truly planetary scale. In modern-day India, within the vast region known as the Deccan Traps, eruptions of monstrous proportions commenced. This was no singular volcano, but an entire geological province, a colossal, incandescent wound on Earth's body, spanning approximately 1.5 million square kilometers, from which endless rivers of scorching lava poured forth for tens of thousands of years. Picture this. The volume of basalt extruded was so immense that it would have been enough to completely blanket the entirety of modern-day France under a layer 1 kilometer thick. These colossal eruptions spewed inconceivable amounts of carbon dioxide, sulfur, and other toxic compounds into the atmosphere. This was no isolated incident. It was a slow, suffocating gas attack that gradually choked the entire planet. Sulfur emissions generated dense aerosol clouds, blocking sunlight and causing sharp yet ephemeral periods of cooling, known as volcanic winters. Then, as the aerosols dispersed, the accumulated atmospheric carbon dioxide led to a potent greenhouse effect, triggering extreme periods of heat. Ecosystems found themselves quite literally on a climatic seesaw, tossed between bone-chilling cold and scorching inferno, which catastrophically undermined the stability of plant life and initiated a chain reaction of destruction throughout the entire food web. If we view these events through the lens of bioenergetics, a unique economy of life, all life on Earth fundamentally relies on a single currency, the sun's energy, which plants convert into biomass through photosynthesis. This is the planet's global budget. The Deccan eruptions became, for this economy, a colossal, suffocating tax and a source of permanent hyperinflation. Volcanic winters drastically reduced sunlight input, causing production to plummet at its very foundation. Acid rain, triggered by sulfur emissions, poisoned the means of production, soils and oceans. The alternation of extreme cold and hot periods created unbearable volatility in the market of life, primarily harming the largest corporations, the gigantic dinosaurs, whose business model was predicated on stability and the availability of vast resources. By the time the asteroid struck, the global economy of life was already in the deepest recession, and it was into this weakened, catastrophically imbalanced world that the cosmic impact landed. This wasn't merely a market shock, it was a complete and instantaneous write-off of all assets, a total collapse that finished the work begun by the titanic volcanic eruptions. Thus, the story of the giant's demise becomes not just a narrative about a cosmic impact, but a profound reflection on the fragility of even the most formidable dominion in the face of a dual threat: slow, systemic decline and sudden, crushing catastrophe. Today, the most well-founded and intellectually honest hypothesis is the double punch or perfect storm scenario. The dinosaur empire and the world they inhabited fell victim not to a single factor, but to a complex array of destructive circumstances on a planetary scale. Deccan volcanism acted like a chronic illness, slowly poisoning and depleting the biosphere, rendering it unusually fragile and vulnerable, much like an organism with a compromised immune system. Numerous ecosystems were already under immense pressure, and species diversity in some regions showed an alarming decline even before the culmination of the catastrophic event. It was at this most critical and weakened moment that the asteroid impact followed, a sudden, life-incompatible trauma inflicted from the outside. Separately, each of these factors likely would not have led to such an all-encompassing extinction. However, their combined action produced a synergistic effect, multiplying their mutual destructive power many times over. This precisely explains the selectivity of the mass extinction. It didn't simply wipe out random species, but rather entire, seemingly thriving yet inflexible systems that proved incapable of withstanding the dual onslaught of chaos. Within these dramatic events lies a deep, almost philosophical meaning. The asteroid's fall is not merely a dry geological fact. It is a powerful symbol of cosmic randomness, reminding us that even the most prolonged and successful dominion can be instantaneously cut short by a blind, relentless force from beyond. But the survival of birds and mammals is not simply a string of luck. It is the clearest symbol of the triumph of an entirely different principle of existence. For nearly 150 million years, dinosaurs built their dominant empire on the fundamental tenets of gigantism, fearsome power, and highly specialized adaptation. Their strategy seemed to declare, "We are too big to fall." Yet, the catastrophe mercilessly demonstrated, nothing is too big to fail. A fundamentally different strategy prevailed: modest size, astonishing adaptability, omnivory, high metabolic rates, and rapid reproductive cycles. This was the startup strategy of the animal kingdom. Nimble, incredibly fast, and astonishingly resilient creatures capable not just of surviving, but of thriving amidst the ruins of the old world. Thus, the extinction of the dinosaurs was more than just the end of one remarkable dynasty. It was a truly tectonic shift in the very philosophy of life on the planet, vividly demonstrating that ultimately it is not brute, overwhelming force, but rather adaptability and an unparalleled capacity for rapid, radical change that are the true keys to long-term survival in a merciless universe where global catastrophes are, in essence, inevitable. And now, having traversed this dizzying path of investigation, from the somber scenes of the smoking ruins of the greatest extinction to the spectacular fiery curtain that descended from space, all the seemingly disparate threads of our grand inquiry finally weave together into a truly astonishing picture. We have witnessed how, on a devastated, poisoned planet, a completely new, audacious biological engineering idea took root. We've had the chance to peek under the hood of this unique biological machine and meticulously dissect its revolutionary chassis with upright limbs, its super-efficient engine featuring internal turbocharging in its lungs, and its astonishingly light yet incredibly strong frame of hollow bones. We've met the invisible armies of microorganisms that, as it turns out, were the true financiers of the giant's era, maintaining the global element cycle. We've experienced the slow but inevitable ecological crisis, when the quiet revolution of flowering plants began to gradually erode the foundations of their once unshakable empire from within. And finally, we've seen how a perfect storm, comprising volcanic hell on Earth and a devastating asteroid impact, drew the final tragic line in this monumental saga. The picture of what happened becomes crystal clear, and now we are ready to formulate the main, overarching question. What then was the true secret behind the dinosaur phenomenon? Why exactly did they achieve such a level of dominance, and why did their reign last for such an incredibly long time? At first glance, the answer to this question might seem disarmingly obvious. They were simply better designed. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg, only half the truth, concealing a deeper and more intriguing secret. The true genius of dinosaurs lay not in any single, albeit incredibly successful design, but in their creation of a universal biological platform. Imagine a kind of Dinosauria OS, so powerful, flexible and scalable that evolution could create virtually any biological application upon its foundation, satisfying the most improbable requirements. Needed a 100-ton living skyscraper capable of effortlessly reaching foliage 5 stories high. Here you go, the majestic Argentinosaurus. Needed a small, nimble predator the size of a common domestic chicken to hunt insects and small reptiles. Meet the agile Compsognathus. Required a virtually impenetrable living fortress, entirely covered in heavy bony armor and armed with a powerful bony club at the end of its tail. Behold, the invincible Ankylosaurus. Or perhaps a highly intelligent pack hunter with sharp, sickle-shaped claws and developed feathers, capable of astonishingly coordinated group attacks. Get yourself a swift velociraptor. This incredible range of forms, stretching from colossal giants to miniature dwarfs, from clumsy tanks to lightning-fast race cars, was possible solely because they were all founded upon the same ingenious biological core, a unique anatomy, highly efficient respiration, and a special metabolism that, working in synergy, gave evolution almost boundless freedom for creative experimentation and the creation of countless, incredible species. It was in this universality, in the system's ability to scale and adapt unprecedentedly, that the enigma of their triumph lay, and perhaps the key to understanding why some principles of life prove more successful than others, even in the most unpredictable times. And so, here we arrive at the very core, the formulation of the true enigma of dinosaurs. Their genius lay not so much in their perfect adaptation to the existing world, but in their ability to radically reshape that world to suit their needs. They didn't just occupy available ecological niches, they became the veritable architects and engineers of an entirely new planetary ecosystem. Their colossal size was not a passive consequence of evolution, but an active strategy that fundamentally altered the physical reality around them. For instance, giant herds of sauropods were not merely herbivorous consumers of biomass, they acted as living landscape designers. By trampling constant migration routes, they created something akin to dinosaur highways, compacted paths that altered local hydrology, influenced the distribution of vegetation, and served as thoroughfares for other animal species. By devouring vegetation across vast territories and carrying seeds for tens of kilometers in their enormous digestive tracts, they became the most effective agents for plant dispersal in the planet's entire history, actively shaping the flora of entire continents. They prevented forests from turning into impenetrable thickets, maintaining open, park-like landscapes that, in turn, were maximally beneficial to themselves. They were living dams, capable of altering river courses and walking fertilizer factories, enriching the soil. Realizing this allows us to truly grasp the immense scale of their dominance. This wasn't merely a struggle for survival within existing rules, it was a complete economic and ecological occupation of the entire planet. Their presence was so overwhelming that for 150 million years they imposed a strict evolutionary ceiling on all other animal groups, primarily our own ancestors, mammals. Throughout the entire Mesozoic era, mammals were forced to exist in the shadow of these colossal creatures. They remained relatively small, never exceeding the size of a modern badger, leading predominantly nocturnal lives, sheltering in burrows and crevices. Any attempt to step outside this niche, to grow larger, or to adopt an active diurnal life was immediately curtailed, either by the sharp teeth of a predatory dinosaur or the heavy tread of a giant herbivore. Dinosaurs created a world where there was simply no place under the sun for mammals. This wasn't mere dominance, it was a systematic suppression of any potential competition for an entire geological era. So what, then, is the grand synthesis, the definitive revelation? The true marvel of the dinosaurs lies in this. They were the first and perhaps the last in Earth's history to undertake a project of total planetary engineering. They were not mere kings, for kings come and go. They were the very fabric of their world, its skeleton, its circulatory system. Their story is a testament to life's incredible capacity to forge complex order from primordial chaos, to its colossal power to reshape entire continents and orchestrate global energy flows across inconceivable geological epochs. They sculpted a system so perfect, stable, and all-encompassing that its unraveling required a conspiracy of truly cosmic proportions, a synchronized assault from the planet's core and the icy depths of outer space. And even then, their opulent legacy did not vanish without a trace. It merely transformed, leaving us their direct descendants, birds who to this day carry within them that revolutionary blueprint: hollow bones, feathers, and a unique air sac breathing system, a living, pulsating reminder of the grandest and perhaps most tragic empire in the annals of life on our planet. When the dust finally settled from that cataclysmic asteroid impact, a deafening, terrifying silence descended upon the planet. The thunderous stomp of giants and their furious, earth-shaking roars, which had echoed across continents for 150 million years, were silenced forever. A new world dawned, empty, devastated, yet paradoxically liberated. And this very moment ignited the most pivotal domino effect in the history of life on Earth. The catastrophe that forever extinguished the dinosaurs became the great liberation for our own humble ancestors. Throughout the entire Mesozoic era, mammals were, in essence, second-class citizens, perpetually suppressed and relegated to the shadows. They were forced to lead a furtive, predominantly nocturnal existence, remaining diminutive, shrew-like creatures whose primary evolutionary strategy was to avoid the keen eyes and crushing feet of their gigantic neighbors. The demise of the dinosaurs lifted this 150-million-year-old yoke of oppression from them. Suddenly, the evolutionary ceiling that had so long capped their development vanished. For the first time in their entire history, mammals could emerge from their burrows and crevices not merely in search of sustenance, but as potential future architects of the planet. This turning point became the true starting point for their explosive evolution. A window of opportunity opened, and they seized it with unparalleled zeal, giving rise to all the astonishing diversity of life forms we behold today, from tiny bats to colossal blue whales. And in the grand scheme of things, it was this very cataclysm that forged the path to humanity's appearance. Our own civilization, with all its triumphs and complexities, is a direct, albeit extraordinarily distant, consequence of that ancient asteroid. However, the cascading chain of events set in motion by the giants' vanishing impacted not just the animal kingdom, but also ignited a truly global green revolution. While we often envision Mesozoic forests as impenetrable, lush jungles, this popular notion doesn't quite align with reality. The sheer presence of tens of thousands of multi-ton, herbivorous living lawnmowers exerted colossal, relentless pressure on all the planet's vegetation. Colossal sauropods and immense herds of hadrosaurs were not merely biomass consumers. They functioned as active landscape engineers, perpetually sculpting their surroundings. Their unceasing activity prevented forests from devolving into impenetrable thickets, fostering instead the proliferation of open, park-like spaces and vast savannas where grasses and scattered arboreal groups held sway. With their sudden disappearance, this colossal biological pressure completely ceased. The plant kingdom, liberated from its primary consumers and landscape architects, began to change rapidly and radically. Across the planet, especially in equatorial and tropical latitudes, a vigorous growth and formation of dense, multi-layered humid forests began, precisely the type of complex ecosystem we now call tropical rainforests. These new, extraordinarily rich forest masses, in turn, spawned countless entirely new ecological niches, particularly in the arboreal layer. It was within these lush, dense forests that the vigorous and successful evolution of primates commenced, a group of mammals that proved perfectly adapted to life in the tree canopy. Thus, a clear and striking causal link emerges. The demise of the dinosaurs led to a global flourishing of modern tropical forests, and the emergence of these forests in turn became the cradle for our own tree-dwelling ancestors. So, the Great Extinction, seemingly closing one chapter, actually opened a new, unexpected page in the book of life, where from the ashes of the past, the roots of the future began to sprout, leading to our very existence. The legacy of Earth's ancient giants extends far beyond geological strata and scientific biological treatises. It is deeply embedded in the very fabric of human culture, sometimes in its most unexpected corners. Imagine a primal human, be it a nomad traversing endless plains or a farmer cultivating their field, who, digging into the soil or exploring a mysterious gorge, suddenly stumbles upon a fossilized thigh bone of colossal proportions, almost equal to their own height. Or a gigantic skull, adorned with horns and armed with teeth as sharp as daggers. How could these discoveries have been perceived by a mind utterly devoid of concepts of geological epochs and long-extinct life forms? The only conclusion one could draw in that distant era was that these bones belonged to monsters. It is highly probable that such astonishing finds, scattered across the globe, from the sandy expanses of the Gobi Desert to the vast European plains, formed the bedrock of countless myths about mighty dragons, sharp-eyed griffins, one-eyed cyclops, and colossal giants. For instance, the famous narrative of griffins could well have originated from the fossil remains of Protoceratops discovered in Central Asia. The powerful beak and bony frill of these dinosaurs could easily have been interpreted as the body of a lion with the head of an eagle. Thus, whenever we delve into the world of fantasy, enthusiastically watch films about flying dragons, or tell toddlers tales of unseen monsters, we are, without realizing it, touching upon a distorted, mythologized echo of a long-vanished Mesozoic era. Moreover, humanity unconsciously borrows ingenious engineering designs, honed by the evolution of ancient reptiles, and integrates them into its own technological solutions. Take, for example, the skeleton of any large theropod or pterosaur. Their bones are not solid. They are hollow, yet possess incredible strength due to a complex internal structure consisting of a system of struts or trabeculae. This is a truly ideal design solution, allowing for maximum stability and reliability with minimum weight, a principle underpinning the entire modern aerospace industry and architectural design. The design of the Eiffel Tower, with its intricate metal trusses, conceptually mirrors the internal structure of a human thigh bone, which in turn inherited this efficient principle from our most ancient ancestors. And the long neck of a sauropod, supported by a sophisticated system of tendons and astonishingly lightweight vertebrae, presents an almost ready-made blueprint for designing a highly efficient and stable cantilever crane or a magnificent bridge. Modern bionics, also known as biomimetics, is an entire scientific discipline specifically studying solutions created by nature for their subsequent application in our technologies. And in this context, ancient dinosaurs, with their unique adaptations to gigantism, flight, and highly efficient locomotion, serve engineers as an inexhaustible source of inspiration and ready-made solutions, rigorously tested over tens of millions of years. However, the most astounding aspect lies in the paradoxical transformation of their image, in how the perception of these creatures has, over time, flipped to its complete opposite. During the nascent, uncertain steps of paleontology in the 19th century, dinosaurs were widely viewed as a stark symbol of evolutionary failure. They were associated with cumbersome, unwieldy, dim-witted reptiles, a dead-end branch of development that, in the view of scientists at the time, deservedly went extinct, unable to compete with more progressive mammals. The very word dinosaur even became a pejorative, synonymous with something hopelessly outdated, clumsy, and doomed to oblivion. But a scientific revolution that unfolded in the latter half of the 20th century, dubbed the dinosaur renaissance, completely upended these established notions. Suddenly, it became clear that they were active, energetic, often warm-blooded animals possessing complex social behaviors. And here lies the central paradox. The ultimate symbol of failure transmuted into the ultimate symbol of success. Creatures that dominated the planet for 150 million years are an undeniable testament to incredible evolutionary resilience. Today, a dinosaur is no longer a terrifying monster from a distant past, but a hugely popular icon of mass culture and, no less importantly, an invaluable scientific model for studying biomechanics, physiology, and the consequences of large-scale climate change. Their image has journeyed a long way from loser to undisputed champion. Who could have foreseen that beings once stigmatized as symbols of extinction would become the brightest proof of life's tenacity and adaptability on our planet? The true, most tangible legacy of Earth's ancient behemoths is not hidden in museum halls, nor in the intricate tapestries of ancient myths, nor in complex engineering blueprints. It lives, breathes deeply, and soars freely right outside our windows. The age of dinosaurs, contrary to popular belief, never truly ended. One of their evolutionary lineages, a group of small, feathered theropods, managed to weather the global catastrophe and give rise to the entire diversity of modern birds. This is not merely an elegant metaphor, but a rigorously confirmed scientific fact. Every time your gaze falls upon a sparrow boisterously hopping along the sidewalk or a pigeon swiftly launching into the sky from a city square, you are witnessing the existence of a living dinosaur. In their anatomical structure, in the unique architecture of their hollow bones, in the presence of a wishbone, the very one we find in roasted chicken and call the lucky bone, in their extraordinary respiratory system, and of course, in their feathers. In all of this lies the living heritage of their mighty ancestors. The fearsome roar of a Tyrannosaurus has, of course, been replaced by the melodic chirping of a chickadee, but the genetic lineage itself remains unbroken. We habitually divide the planet's history into distinct epochs, but this is merely our conventional classification. We do not simply live in the age of mammals. We continue to exist in the age of dinosaurs, which we now simply refer to as the age of birds. And this, perhaps, is the deepest and most instructive lesson their incredible story can teach us. Even the grandest of empires do not always vanish without a trace. Sometimes they merely gain the ability to fly. The story of dinosaurs, at first glance, seems infinitely distant from us, a hoary antiquity utterly alien to the world of smartphones, rapidly evolving artificial intelligence, and global financial markets. However, this misconception is profoundly dangerous. If we look closer, their history is not merely a chronicle of bygone eras. It is a kind of mirror that very clearly reflects our own, quite troubling present. Dinosaurs inhabited a world that was mercilessly shattered by a series of global, systemic upheavals, from the slow, suffocating impact of volcanic gases and abrupt climate shifts to, finally, a sudden and devastating cosmic impact. Their world, however mighty it seemed, proved astonishingly fragile. Today, in an epoch that scientists increasingly define as the Anthropocene, we ourselves, with our own hands, are the instigators of our own global crisis. We are altering the climate at an unprecedented speed, destroying fragile ecosystems and triggering the sixth mass extinction in our planet's history. The crucial yet fundamental difference is that dinosaurs were passive victims of a catastrophe they could neither foresee nor comprehend. We, conversely, are simultaneously the architects and the first conscious witnesses of our own global crisis. So what is the main, non-obvious lesson we can glean from their 150 million-year saga? It is by no means reduced to a banal call to adapt or die. Its meaning is far deeper and more nuanced. The lesson of the dinosaurs is a harsh warning about the dangers lurking in perfection and the illusory nature of absolute stability. Their empire was built on a foundation of gigantism, might, and the highest degree of biological specialization. They were perfectly, flawlessly adapted to their world, its conditions, and its resources. Their bodies were flawless natural machines, and their ecosystems functioned like perfectly tuned mechanisms. But it was precisely this seeming perfection that became their death sentence. They became so utterly integrated into the existing order that when the fundamental rules of the game began to shift rapidly, first with the emergence of flowering plants and then under the blows of global catastrophes, they found themselves in a metabolic and evolutionary trap. Their most outstanding strengths, their colossal size, their incredible power, their highly specialized diets, transformed overnight into their primary vulnerabilities. They were too massive to find shelter, too energy-intensive to survive starvation, and too specialized to quickly adapt to new food sources. The secret to true resilience, it turns out, isn't found in dazzling might or single-minded optimization for a particular environment. It lies in flexibility, diversity, and a multitude of backup plans. The ultimate survivors, the small, agile mammals and their fellow travelers, the birds, were anything but the Mesozoic era's most perfect creatures. They were opportunists. They could subsist on virtually anything: seeds, insects, carrion. They knew how to hide away in burrows, deep fissures, or hollowed-out trees. Their diminutive size and accelerated metabolism allowed them to scrape by even on the mere crumbs left behind by a crumbling world of giants. They didn't possess a single, dazzling, yet perilous strategy. Instead, they had a multitude of small, seemingly unassuming, but astonishingly effective survival tactics. While the dinosaurs staked everything on a single card, the card of a stable, predictable world, the surviving creatures shrewdly diversified their risks. They were, in essence, biological startups that not only weathered the storm, but flourished amidst the collapse of giant, lumbering corporations. Can we possibly absorb this profound lesson before we, too, bear witness to the fragility of perfection revealing itself once more? Now, as we project these ancient lessons onto our own existence, we are inevitably led to ponder our modern global civilization. With its intricately tangled, interdependent supply chains, its critical reliance on a handful of key energy sources, and its prevailing monocultural agriculture, our civilization stands as a colossal triumph of optimization. Much like those ancient leviathans, we have meticulously constructed an incredibly intricate and highly efficient system that appears perfectly adapted to current environmental conditions. Yet, it is precisely this extreme optimization that has simultaneously rendered it exceedingly fragile. We have come to resemble a prehistoric Tyrannosaurus rex, a colossal, incredibly powerful predator perched atop the food chain, utterly convinced of its own invulnerability. But what happens to our intricate system if just one of its fundamental links, be it climate stability, agricultural yields, or uninterrupted energy supplies, suddenly falters or gives way? The saga of the dinosaurs relentlessly teaches us that any system reaching the pinnacle of specialization and losing vital flexibility becomes catastrophically vulnerable to systemic shocks, which, as a rule, crash down entirely without warning. However, let us not conclude this narrative on such a somber note. For the history of the dinosaurs is not merely a tragic saga of a great vanishing act, but also an inspiring parable of eternal renewal. Their demise wasn't simply the end of an era, it was the harbinger of our very genesis. The global catastrophe that swept them from the face of the earth effectively cleared the stage for the emergence of new players and the realization of entirely novel evolutionary designs. Life, teetering on the precipice of near annihilation, refused to capitulate. It forged new pathways, birthed forms previously unimagined, and ultimately sculpted a world where the dawn of self-aware consciousness became possible. This, then, is the grand, relentless pulse of evolution. Eras succeed one another, worlds are born and fade into oblivion, yet life itself, an unyielding force, continues its astonishing ascent, growing ever more complex, diverse, and utterly captivating. And perhaps it is precisely in this that the most profound, most humbling, and yet most inspiring conclusion truly resides. 150 million years of dinosaur dominance may seem like an eternity to us. Yet, on the scale of Earth's 4.5 billion-year history, it's merely one chapter in an enormous, continuously unfolding narrative. Our own history, the story of humankind, comprises just a few sentences on the very last page of that chapter. The history of the dinosaurs serves as a potent antidote to hubris. It reminds us that we are neither the absolute masters of this planet, nor certainly the pinnacle of creation. We are merely one of nature's countless experiments, temporary custodians of a fragile world, bestowed with an extraordinary gift, a consciousness capable of grasping both its past and its potential future. And for the first time in Earth's entire history, what the next chapter will be in this magnificent book of existence no longer hinges on the blind forces of asteroids and volcanoes, but depends solely on our own conscious choice.